等同门的等听见很多讲着生计这讲Lamala说完这样了。
Initially, as has been explained already several times, we start out by way of praying to our Lama, of starting the session out with this particular practice, as praying to him, taking refuge, etc. Now we imagine our root Lama to be sitting above our heads upon a seat of 1,000-petaled lotus flower and the moon disk. He sits there in a cross-legged position, smiling in a friendly way, and he regards all beings with limitless compassion, not a single being excluded. As such, we regard our teacher as the essence of all the sources of refuge, of all the three jewels and the three roots.
Lamala so one there. Lama young Lamala so happy, and then Lama then around the ma pet. I don't know that where Kadam Gongola, Tigan the Lama, Having
prayed to the Lama in this way, We then proceed to imagine how he dissolves into ourselves through the crown of our heads, how he descends down and comes to rest at our heart level, seated in a cross-legged position inside a sphere of 5-colored light that is roughly egg-shaped and open towards the top. From among the instructions that we have already heard, we were initially instructed how there are 3 particular points to all of this, to the general outline of the 7 points of mind training. And these points are that which has to be trained in, or that which needs to be purified, then the actual instruction itself, and finally then there are instructions about how we should proceed in between sessions. From among these instructions we have then also heard how there are 3 occasions which will present themselves, during which the 3 mental defilements or emotional defilements will present themselves, and how they can be changed or transformed into what we call the 3 roots of virtue. Having heard an explanation of how to go about this in the main part by way of the practice of sending and taking, how to exchange ourselves for others, this is yet again reconfirmed, so to speak, by a word of Kadampa-Geshes himself, who says, train yourself according to the word. What word does he mean here? He means none other but the word of the Buddha himself, in which the Buddha himself has clearly said, take all of the evil upon yourself, all of the evil, the negativity of beings, and exchange it for all your virtue. So yet again, we have the very same instruction in which you are being told that we should exchange ourselves in the way as we have already heard, by way of imagining how we take all the negativity, all the pain, the suffering, the causes thereof, etc., of beings upon ourselves, so it may come to ripen within ourselves, and so that beings may become free of it. And at the same time, we exchange we return in return for what we have taken of them, we return all the positive, all the good, all the virtue of ourselves, all the happiness, the joy, etc., and the causes thereof that we, for ourselves, have accumulated to beings. In this way, this practice of exchange, of sending and taking is being performed. And accordingly, also the old Kadampa-Geshes have said it very much in the same words, with the same meaning, in which they advise us that all the loss, all the negative circumstances, all the pain whatsoever of beings are to be taken onto ourselves, whereas all the positive gain, etc., of ourselves is to be given to them. Yet again, the same is being expressed in slightly different words by the great master and bodhisattva Asanga, in which it says, in which he said, may all the evil and suffering of others come to ripen within myself. May all my virtue, merit, in turn be enjoyed by these others. So again, we hear yet the same points with slightly different words, However, these are quotes from masters of the practice lineage, of the lineage who have handed down these teachings. So just to reconfirm these again and again, we hear these quotes from various sources. So it should be clear by now what's the main point of this practice and how this practice is performed, this practice of sending and taking. What we do during this practice, once again, is we give all our joy, all our happiness, all the causes thereof, all the positive virtue that we have ever accumulated away to others. We send it to them so that they may enjoy it, that they may have happiness and positive circumstances. In turn, after having sent all of this positive of ourselves away to others, we take upon ourselves all the negative, all the bad, all the pain, all the suffering and the causes thereof of others, so that they may come to ripen in ourselves, so that others may become free of this. This is the technique that is being employed while practicing this meditation of sending and taking. That's the main point. Now, why do we perform such a practice in the first place? What's the actual point of it? The actual point of it is to erode this idea of and this clinging to this seemingly existent self. This idea of ours that there truly is a self, an ego, however we want to call it, that it has any true existence unto itself. Looking at this dispassionately, we actually start to see that truly this ego, or that what we take for an ego, is like an anxious wild animal that is sitting somewhere in the corner, anxiously awaiting whatever situation in which others might revile us, others might be harsh to us, others might bring any harm onto us, and to pounce and to defend itself in such situations. Truly such a self, as we have already heard but not yet realized, is not existent, yet we still cling to this idea. And this idea itself, as well as the clinging to it, has to be eroded eventually, has to be dissolved eventually. And this is what this practice of sending and taking, exchanging oneself for others, is very appropriate means for. Now, one of the effects of such practice, by which we erode this belief and this clinging onto this self, which is likened to a wild animal, to an anxious wild animal, is that this wild animal slowly is being tamed through these methods. As this idea, this belief, this clinging is being diminished, so will our emotional defilements and activities which are being performed on the basis of them will be diminished. Our desire, our anger, whatever it might be, and all sorts of combinations thereof will become lesser and lesser, to such an extent that we perform lesser negative deeds which bring about suffering, therefore in turn experience lesser suffering. So that is the whole idea, the whole underlying purpose of all of this practicing in the first place.
대시 공리 공도 패링 대 공리 공도 패나 아랑게 산 삼바동 홍지지 용을 대라된 대 생진인 대시 pen 토바 생진 토바 생진 당제라 삼바 삼부고 사와도 토바다 된디 용을
in turn went through the course of such practice. This clinging to a self, or to stick with the analogy of this wild animal that anxiously tries to defend itself constantly, is being diminished, becomes lesser and lesser. To the same extent, our appreciation for others increases. We become more kind, we become more friendly towards others. We have find it easier to have to listen to the problems of others, etc. So in this way, altogether, our general way of interacting with others becomes of a much more peaceful, much more friendly nature. Therefore, to practice in such a way is in many respects very beneficial.
Then some of these super medieval double chong, and I don't give me was tell at in the now to go medieval something in Jicko.
Then invariably there will also be some, particularly among beginners, who have this idea that if they exchange themselves for others and take the suffering and pain of others upon themselves, that indeed they themselves will experience this suffering, they themselves will have pain or sickness. And all too often it actually happens that while doing so, all of a sudden they start to think like, I really start to feel unwell now, and there is this pain which wasn't there a minute ago, so this must be the result of having taken the suffering of others upon myself.
I think I don't know, let Tambo-Geshes, Society, and not to the Jungare Matuga, and I don't know you pardon. Okay, that Tiga, and the Yin Sanjing, the Pato, no, I don't such a lane of my Yin Sanjing Tamjig, Dumhertam, Tetani, Medeva Lasso, Tamji, Guruyoga, Lamala, Korong, Le Dipasani. Deep and deep, Sanjing Dumarte, Yumare. They ended the Dumarte Korong song and young Remato, the old Tonga Tamji, the Domatamji lane of my head.
Okay, there might be this idea of people, among people that taking the suffering of others upon themselves, all of a sudden they might feel sick or might experience pains or whatsoever. Now Rinpoche says this is nothing but a confused thought. How could we expect, particularly as we're beginners, to be able to take the suffering of others upon ourselves simply by sitting there and breathing in and out and in and out? The suffering that people, that beings, experience, including ourselves, has solely been caused by themselves through their negative actions throughout innumerable lifetimes since time beginningless. And there is no way for us, particularly as beginners, how we could truly take their suffering upon ourselves, how we could truly take it away from themselves. There is no such possibility. This is not the way it works. And then Rinpoche says, since yesterday we have practiced this meditation of sending and taking a little bit. There aren't any among you, are there, who all of a sudden feel pains that have not been there heretofore? Then in turn, of course, we could think, well, if that's the case, if I cannot truly take the suffering of others upon myself through inhaling, or send all my joy and happiness to others through my exhaling, well, what's then the point of all of this? Why don't I then just proceed to breathe normally without any ideas and imaginations and visualizations? There is no point, there is no benefit. That in turn would also be a wrong idea, because this practice is very beneficial indeed.
I don't know Taming, Senji Tamji, Donghan Tamji, Narutu, Lambig, Mipatin gone, Narangi, Jinzing, Decima, Shendro, Dodon Zambati. Dodon Zambado, Jinzing, the Junzima, Hena, then Senji Tamji, Sambado, Ninja, the wrong Yinga,
Very clearly, if we practice in this way, this wild animal, to stick with this analogy, in ourselves, this exaggerated self-appreciation of ourselves, which thinks ourselves as being the most important thing in the world, will gradually decrease. And as that happens, our appreciation for others, our kindness and our compassion towards others will increase. In this way, it is clearly pointed out that this practice is not pointless, but a very beneficial one.
I think I look at somebody in young Tabakina, Maranga Koa, Tomabasa, big part of Drovati, Tabarse, Tap Cheparkini. Narusana, somebody in Cheparki, then I look at big part of Tabarse, Tap Cheparki.
Then again, in turn, practicing in this way and increasing our own kindness, our own compassion towards others, this will again enable us to purify all the negativity, the causes thereof, etc., that we have accumulated for ourselves since beginningless time through innumerable rebirths. Therefore, again, yet another of the great benefits of this practice is clearly pointed out. Now there are many stories of great masters of the past that exemplifies the importance and the benefits of giving rise to kindness and compassion towards others. For instance, that famous stories of the great master and Bodhisattva Asanga, who went to a certain mountain in India and practiced their institution for 12 years, concentrating upon his chosen meditative deity, the future Buddha Maitreya. However, within these 12 years, he wasn't able to bring about any result.
And Chimuchi, Comina Rota, the Lambo Momo Tabdeva, Cotena Sembuka Sodoyava, the Nike is do, then he sent in the London Driver, Lemba, Doman, the Nikis and Coin, told the Hingi Chapakin, Tommy, then Bote Lapagasin and Botamji Shadow. I gave a part down in Botamji Zama Google, something, then he check a road. Rusoma not on Charles of Mombo Yovard, make a dana, Titani, kick a dot to him. And it make the king the ma Zumni, then he and it said, get the Sara Toson. That did, then that was someone on Dungeon, then he charged him. And then that was someone on Jarvadi. Then Tommy gets in, may look unique for the Cheron Cheron Tapa, and Jarmas of the Khan. And that's a somebody. Cheron Lodini Tampo, Drogan and Cheron Yonder Yore. Yenaya, Cheron San, la Dipato Drova Chimbo Yovara, San Nacharon Tom Tolman those. Tariga Gavla Chimonda Latine, then Ninji Chapartin Charon, Ninji Latin, they put Sawan toss on, then not one.
He was Asanga, was practicing in his cave on this mountain intensively for 12 years, and in these 12 years he went through various frustrations, and he again practiced very intensively, but nothing whatsoever happened. There was not the slightest sign of accomplishment, let alone a dream or a vision of the Buddha Maitreya that he was so intensively meditating upon. After 12 years of that, he thought to himself, okay, I give up, I've had it, there's no point. He left his retreat. He wandered the land, and rather disillusioned, one can imagine. And as he was getting close to a certain city, on the path, on the street that he was walking in front of himself, he came upon the body of a female dog. This dog at first sight seemed dead. Already worms, maggots were eating the flesh of the dog. Was an altogether unpleasant sight. But as he came closer, he had to see that this female dog was still alive, and not that at all. There was a huge wound in the side of this dog, which was completely infested with worms and maggots and all sorts of other vermin, which were slowly eating away, and it was clear that this dog was suffering intensely. And as he saw this sight, he was for once consumed by intense compassion, thinking, oh my goodness, how can this poor animal suffer in such a way, and what can I do to alleviate the suffering of this dog? So he thought to himself, well, I have to clean the wound of this dog. I have to take the worms and the maggots out. But how? If I take him out with my fingers, I run the danger of killing the worms. That won't do. But if I leave him in there, for sure, the dog will die soon. So he thought to himself, the only way to go about it is that you should suck these worms and maggots out of the dog's wound with his tongue. Now the sight, as one can imagine, was a rather unpleasant one, and he could not even bear to look at this wound. So he closed his eyes, he went down on his knees, he extended his tongue, expecting to touch the worms in the wound of this dog, but all of a sudden he opened his eyes again, as to his great surprise, instead of that dog, he had touched the bare earth with his tongue. He was very surprised indeed, and he looked up, and all of a sudden there was the one he had been expecting all along for the last 12 years. There in front of him was the Buddha Maitreya. He was completely dumbstruck and completely surprised. Yet again, the first idea that popped up in his mind was a complaint. He said, well, I've been meditating upon you for 12 years. I've been praying to you. So come on, what happened? Why are you here all of a sudden? Where do you come from now? And the Buddha Maitreya said to him, well, I've been there from the very first day, but because of your obscurations, of your defilements, etc., you were unable to see me. Just now, in this very moment, as you have seen this dog, the wound, the great suffering of this animal, which was none other but a manifestation of myself, you have for the first time given rise to loving kindness and compassion. And the result thereof is such that many of your obscurations have instantly become purified, and therefore you are able to see me. So this story may serve as an analogy, as an example of how beneficial it is to give rise to kindness, to give rise to compassion towards others. So this is an advice that is to be taken into practice. So therefore, if sometime in the future we come upon a sick dog or any other animal for that matter, we might just try it out, stick out our tongues, lick the animal, and who knows, maybe all of a sudden our Yidam Deity may appear in front of us. So this entire story, all of these stories of that sort, they serve as an example of how it is beneficial to give rise to loving kindness and compassion, how it is beneficial to slowly erode this idea and clinging to self, this exaggerated self-appreciation, etc., and instead make space for the appreciation of others, make space for loving kindness for others in such a way that eventually our own negative traits may be diminished and that we may give rise to positive ones. This, if one looks at it, would be, if we were to look for, to bring about benefit for ourselves, this would be the greatest possible benefit that we could bring about for ourselves. So the first part of this practice very clearly is the taking upon ourselves of the suffering and pain and the causes thereof of others, so that they may come to ripen within ourselves and that others may become free of them. The second part consists of us giving away all the joy, the happiness and the causes thereof to others so that they may enjoy them. If we train ourselves in this way, then we slowly, gradually train ourselves in the way of looking at others, looking at what it is that is appropriate for others, having a clear, open mind for that which others, which others need, what they're in need of. That, in turn, will be beneficial in the future when we ourselves have achieved the awakening of Buddhahood in such a way that we will then truly be able to know in any given moment what is the most appropriate way to go about helping others and to bring about the greatest possible benefit and welfare for them. The text continues with yet another word of Asanga-story himself, in which he says, roughly, when training how to take the suffering of others upon yourself, then begin with yourself. The sequence is to start out with yourself, which means that once we start to train ourselves in this, we have to start out with all the negativity, all the non-virtue, etc., that we ourselves have performed in the past. That we take upon ourselves, and we wish that this may come to ripen within ourselves. While resolving to proceed in this way, we also think that whatever suffering, whatever pain and sickness, etc., we have brought into ourselves through our own negative deeds, we pray that they may not come to ripen sometime in the future, but that they may come to ripen here and now, at this very moment. But having in this way taken the responsibility for our own doing and having taken all the suffering, the negativity that we're about to experience as a result thereof onto ourselves, we are then enabled to proceed to take onto ourselves the suffering, the negativity, etc. of all other beings. And this brings us to the third point from among the 7 points of mind training. To reiterate, the first one of them was the preliminary part. The second one was how to give rise to and nurture that which we call Bodhicitta, the enlightened attitude itself. And the third part, which we now move into, is the bringing onto the path of all the possibly negative or difficult circumstances that we might encounter. And initiating this point, there is yet again another quote of Asanga-story himself, in which he says, while the entire world and its inhabitants are full of evil, it is up to ourselves to make all of this into the path, or to transform all of this into the path that leads to awakening. When we're talking about how, or Kadampa-Geshes talks about the world and its inhabitants being full of evil, what exactly does it mean by this? This is a short and concise description, basically, of the shortcomings of the age in which we live. In our age, the vast majority of beings are under the influence of all kinds of obscurations and emotional defilements, and therefore they constantly immerse themselves in negativity. Or the majority of their activities are ill-intentioned, bring about negativity, bring about harm for others, bring about pain for themselves, etc. And they constantly continue to act in such a way. The age, this age having come to this point at which beings consistently act in such a negative way, this also takes its expression in imbalances in the outer worlds, when all sorts of natural disasters, etc., happen. And so in this way, this short word of the world and its contents being immersed in evil describes this negative, or describes this age of ours in which we live, which is characterized predominantly by negativity. One of the characteristics of such an age is that even though there might be beings who act kind, compassionate, and friendly towards others, their kindness, compassion, and friendliness is repaid in negative ways. Is repaid with being denounced with harsh words, with harsh deeds, and not being returned in kind at all. Now, times having come to such a head that indeed everything is of great negativity, the conduct of beings, the times themselves in general are characterized by negativity, what is it that is left to be done for ourselves? That what is to be done has to be brought about through our own attitude, through our own through the attitude that we ourselves give rise to, which is generally known as the enlightened attitude, or Bodhicitta, the awakened heart. And it is said that in order to counteract these evils and in order to bring them onto the path that leads to awakening, there are three methods. First, we have to apply the so-called conventional Bodhicitta, which is in accord with the world of appearances and phenomena. Then we have to bring to bear the ultimate Bodhicitta, which is in accord with true reality. And on top of that, there are many pieces of advice how to style our conduct in particular. Again, this brings to a close the morning session. Now, there's a short story of a Mahasiddha of old India who practiced in such a way as a practitioner in the world, partaking of the pleasures of the world, etc. There was that King Indrabhuti who at one day with some of his ministers went into the gardens of his palace to enjoy himself, and all of a sudden while doing so he saw these people dressed in yellow robes flying about in the sky from the left to the right and back and forth. He was very surprised. He asked his retainers, he said, "Does any one of you guys know who these people are?" And one of the sages among his staff said, "Well, these are arhats. These are students of the Buddha who have received instructions from the Buddha and therefore have brought about such realization that nowadays they can even fly through the air." King Indrabhuti was greatly impressed, and he said, "Well, if that is the case, I have to go and see this Buddha, because this is an instruction which I also desire. I also want to practice in such a way to be able to fly about in the skies." Together with all of his staff, then with his ministers and advisors, etc., he went to the presence of the Buddha and said to the Buddha, "Great Master, I have seen these students of yours flying about in the sky. Please give me that instruction so that I also may be enabled in the future to do this, to bring about such miracles." The Buddha said, "Well, I can easily give you that instruction. That is not the problem. The problem is for you to practice and realize this instruction, you have to abandon your entire palace, your kingdom, your queens, and all the pleasures, and you have to become an ordinary monk." The king was greatly taken aback and said to the Buddha, "Well, Master, that is not possible. There's no way I can give up all the pleasures of this world, how I can give up my queens, the kingdom, and everything that goes with it. Please give me an instruction anyway through which I can gain realization." The Buddha then said, "Okay, there is an instruction which I can give you," and he proceeded to give him the empowerment of the cycle of Guya Samaja, along with all the liberating instructions, etc. And the king then proceeded to practice these. At the same time, also the staff of the king, the ministers and retainers, etc., had received this instruction. And it is said that as the king then gradually and intensively practiced this in the course of his daily life while going about the business of running his kingdom, he brought this practice to realization. He gained the realization of Mahamudra, and so did all of his ministers, advisors, and retainers. And having achieved this great realization at the same time, all of them were able to go simultaneously to the pure realms. Which means if we were able to practice in this way, we also would be able to bring about such realization quickly.